You're listening to Wildlife Control Consultant, where we provide research-based information on all things related to vertebrate pest management. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of the Wildlife Control Consultant podcast. Well, I'm recording after Thanksgiving, so I hope your Thanksgiving was great with friends and family, and that you had a little chance to be thankful to whichever God you worship. And so definitely this time, I'm trying to take some holiday time and try to work out some podcasts. So I did one Tuesday, and now I'm working on one here today, the day after Thanksgiving. So this is Black Friday. I hope your business here has been black as well, or in the black, I should say, so that that it was a profitable year for you and that you did well. So because a couple of weeks ago I did a presentation on beaver pipes used in the protection of culverts. This week I wanted to talk about the use of beaver pipes involved with dams. But before I do that, do take a few moments, if you would, subscribe to the channel. We'd love to have you subscribed, and also ring the bell so that you can be notified of updates. If you're looking for just strict access to vertebrate pest control videos, you can certainly get that at my Rumble account, and just go to Rumble and search on either Stephen Vantassel or Wildlife Control Consultant. That's Wildlife Control Consultant. Of course, I'm always interested in getting your feedback. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Don't spam. I don't put out blasts, email blasts. Frankly, I just don't have the time for all that. So it's not going to be going in your inbox. So if people are sometimes scared about contacting me via email, email is preferable. I know a lot of you like to do messaging with Facebook. It's really it's difficult for me, and I can't always give a more thorough answer that I can when I'm in front of my email account. Nevertheless, you can also join us on Facebook with our Pest Geek podcast family. We'd love to have you there. It's a place for you to raise questions and shout out about your triumphs and, of course, your trials. All right, well, let me pull my PowerPoint up, and so we can get started on this particular presentation on beaver pipes. And can I kind of cut through all this? This is previous material. There we go. Beaver pipes for what's called pond levelers. So you have beaver pipes that are used to protect culverts. Culvert protection, talked about that last time. You can simply look back through the archives and get that material if you're interested in. Or you can also use beaver pipes for pond leveling, so pond, lake, whatever type of flooding you're looking to mitigate. So I hope that's particularly clear. So we'll spend a few minutes on this today, because I do believe, if I can be a little passionate here, I do believe that this is an underutilized tool in the wildlife control field. Now, it's not a panacea. It doesn't cover everything. It's not going to be the end all and be all, and sometimes you'll get some animal welfare, quasi animal rights people they just can't get beaver pipes off the mine. You don't need to kill them. Well, there are times where you do need to kill them, even when you're using beaver pipes, and we'll maybe chat about that for a little bit. But nevertheless, this is an important tool that I think is underutilized by the industry. All right, so chances are all of you are familiar with what a beaver dam looks like. They come in different flavors. Beavers are just, engineers. They just sort of work on whatever they have available. And so dams can be tiny. They can be huge. So out here in the West, at least in terms of my experience, as limited as it is, I find that the dams out here in the West tend to be much taller. And I think that's an indication of primarily the lack of, when you're in the mountainous country, you tend to get a lot more distance in terms of what's called the drop. And so they just seem to be taller than what I experienced when I was back in Massachusetts. Massachusetts, they tended to look more like the dam you see in the upper left-hand corner, but out here in the west, you tend to see them more along the lower right-hand corner. That photo is taken from Nebraska, but to be fair, there are situations where the dams can be pretty tall. The upper right-hand corner came from Massachusetts as well. But, again, it's all about probabilities, and the environment will tell you how tall that dam is. So they come in different flavors, and you need to definitely keep that in mind, because that's important, because water depth is essential if you're dealing with an environment where you can have freeze-ups. So if your lakes freeze over, your ponds freeze over, it's important that you have sufficient depth so that the beaver don't get froze out. If they get froze out, they can't access their winter cache and they die. And that is not, so you got to make sure that your beaver pipe is used in a location where the water level after the beaver pipe is installed will still be deep enough to allow beaver activity. Now, here's the million-dollar question. Well, how deep is that, right? I haven't seen any clear indication on that. My suspense is that you're looking at a couple of feet. After the beaver pipe's at least a couple feet, probably 3 feet. That way you have, 1 foot for ice and 2 feet for water. It kind of depends on what kind of freezing you have in your particular area. Obviously, those of you in more southerly regions, it's probably not going to be an issue, right? Because you don't have the hard freeze a beaver can break through it if he had to. Those of you, northern Michigan or, Alaska or something like that, that's going to be a much larger issue in terms of those types of situations for the type of freeze up. So definitely keep that in mind. So we need to talk a little bit about a dam complex. So you're looking at a dam complex has a lodge. You have, of course, your river flow, and if the beaver's been there for a little while, there may be multiple dams. So you have the main dam, you've got your lodge, and then you may have secondary dams both above and below the main dam. Now, in this particular photo, this aerial photographs, you can see that there's a primary dam and then there's a secondary dam. So why is that important? Because just simply lowering the water in one may cause issues downstream. And so you have to think of what is going on downstream. Now, clearly, that's going to be difficult for you to do sometimes because you may have difficulties in property access. There may be sensitive areas downstream. Maybe there's a dispute between neighbors. So that's something you're going to have to kind of navigate in terms of determining whether putting a beaver pipe on maybe the main dam, is that going to wash out or put too much pressure on the secondary dam. So the one advantage of using beaver pipes is that, there's a limited amount of water flow. All you're doing is you're just making sure that the water maintains at a certain level. And if there's some flooding, if there's too much water for the pipes to handle, well, then obviously there's going to be a little bit of flooding. But that's just the way it is. But when you're building the beaver pipe system and you're needing to install it in the dam, there's obviously going to be a lot more water flowing through because you got to cut the dam. And so that is something you have to definitely keep in mind of what's going on downstream. So you're trying to keep your silt. You want to keep the debris down. Why? Because silt kills a lot of organisms in the stream system and all that erosion. So we want to be sure that we try to reduce that. So have a plan. Be prepared when you cut the dam and you're putting the pipe in. Try not to dally around. Get it done, and get that dam kind of fixed up so that you're not having just this wall of water going downstream that can threaten downstream structures. So why do we do beaver pipes? Well, simply to stop things like this. Now, we've already talked about protecting culverts, and then you can see some road flooding there. This obviously there was a need for a culvert protection at this particular road, but you have situations over here to the right where there is some flooding around these particular homes, and a beaver pipe through a dam can help mitigate some of that flooding. And so this is what we use it for. Now, a lot of people just say, well, kill the beaver, move on. Things are changing, and sometimes it doesn't really help to kill the beaver, because if it's good habitat, other beavers are going to move in. So why not get out of that sort of killing for killing's sake? Not that I have a problem with that per se, but the problem with wildlife control is we tend to kill and throw away. If someone is going to be a fur trapper and they're going to be harvesting this animal, then sure, then continuing to trap is a wonderful way of managing that particular problem. But as we become more and more anti-trapping in the country because of our anti-environmentalism, of course, as you know, all people that oppose fur trapping are, in my opinion, anti-environmentalists. They just hate the environment. So because I could digress into this, of course, but the reality is that regulated fur harvesting is a renewable resource. And if it's done properly, it's eternal. It lasts forever. Okay, but nevertheless, that's not what people want to hear. And so when you're looking at putting in beaver pipes, you can keep the colony there so that you're not getting this constant, oh, they're building a beaver dam. And sometimes it's better to deal with a dam that is tolerable where it is than a dam that may be moved by the next family that comes in where you cannot tolerate it. Now you have to be talking about total dam removal and that sort of thing. So it can get quite complicated. Sometimes the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. And so that can certainly be the case in beavers. So this is why we're using these beaver pipes. Sometimes beaver pipes need to be installed or where dams need to be removed because of impoundment issues. And that is when you have these major impoundments, it can be a problem for cold-loving fish. So beaver ponds tend to raise temperatures in the water level, and there's also lower dissolved oxygen. Now, I believe I saw an article where there was some dispute about this. Clearly, water temperatures are related to how much tree cover there is, but what do beavers do? They cut down trees, and so that's certainly going to be an issue of itself. What are some of the benefits of dams? This is one of the advantages of having beavers maintain a dam, of course, is you have lower soil erosion. You have all that sediment that's being captured and a rising water table. And there are situations where producers and landowners really should want a rising water table. Out here in the West, I'm here in Montana, we're a very drought stressed state. We have a water stressed state. We know rain is incredibly important to us because we don't really get enough of it. And I'm always puzzled as to why producers just want to keep getting beaver removed because, yeah, there's a little bit of flooding in the spring, but come July, they're usually begging for water, right? Beaver ponds can provide that sort of even out some of those issues, and so you have a higher water table in the area, plus you have lower erosion. They can also do things like it's fire breaks because, again, you have this body of water that's there that can help be important for places that have fire risk, which is, of course, the West. And then lastly, you're creating habitat. Beavers do change the environment, and by changing the environment, they make habitat for a lot of waterfowl and other species as well. So they really are an important species. They can't be tolerated everywhere, of course, but where they can be tolerated, it should be, we should definitely think about having beaver pipes rather than just simply killing beaver. So when we're considering whether or not to put in a beaver pipe, this is what you want to think about, can the client tolerate some flooding? Because remember, a beaver pipe can only allow so much water through the dam, but when you have periods of spring runoff, for example, or a heavy rainstorm, clearly the pipe is not going to be able to compensate for all that additional water. So if the client has like a zero tolerance, it's like, the water level can't rise above this spot, and that's the spot where you reduced it with the beaver pipe in the first place, well, then clearly the beaver pipe's not going to work. Because any rain event, any snow melt event is obviously going to raise that water level. It's just the reality of it. So it's not going to work. So you need to be sure you talk to people and say, look, your house is 100 feet away from the pond. Yeah, and you're looking at it. What historically has been done? Has the pond, when it flooded in the spring, did it, come within 20 feet of your house? Well, that's only going to be a temporary thing, right? So you have to kind of work some of that out. What are the 100-year flood parameters, that sort of thing. And, those are judgment calls. So you need to be sure you're really clear with your client about, can they tolerate it? Can they not tolerate it? Definitely be thinking about septic systems, right? We can't have flooded septic systems. That can be certainly an issue. Second question you want to ask, is the dam in a safe place to begin with? And that is, dams sometimes break. So if the dam is in a situation where if it broke, it would cause some significant loss of property or life, then that beaver colony needs to be removed and the dam taken down. I was trapping in a dam in a city in Massachusetts, and the reason why they wanted the dam removed was because if the dam blew, it was going to flood downtown. And when you got there, yeah, it was a legitimate concern. And so they weren't kidding. It was, when you looked at it, it was like, yeah, if this thing goes, this could be an issue. It could take out maybe this little small bridge that went over the little embankment there. So it was definitely a concern. So you have to think about that. Okay. And then lastly, can there be tree cutting toleration? Will the client tolerate tree cutting? So if a person says, I need to have all my trees, well, then a beaver pipe's not going to do it because you need to get rid of the colony. Beaver pipes don't stop beaver cutting down trees. Now, there is a way, of course, to protect certain trees that may be highly valued and the other ones may not be valued, so that can be done. But if the person's just categorically opposed to any more tree cutting, then you've got to take out the colony. So those aren't the only three questions, but those are three important questions that you definitely need to ask when you're looking at installing beaver pipes. So I mentioned dam failure, and here's an example of one that occurred this doesn't happen often, and I'm not suggesting that it does, but it does happen. And of course, lawsuits are the basis of all this. And so here we have a situation where a town was sued, I guess if I recall correctly, you can look up the story yourself. The town didn't take care of the beaver issue, and when the dam broke, people suffered property damage. And loss of life can occur in certain situations, of course. So you want to be thinking of, again, extended rainfall, was there high snow melt? And so these are things that can cause catastrophic dam failures. Okay. So these things are not unknown. They're not common, but they're not unknown. And of course, I mentioned tree cutting. If someone can't tolerate tree cutting, you're going to have to get rid of the beavers. You do need to think about the beaver's life at the lower water level, and that is particularly those of you in freezing areas. And that is if the water level has to be so low that it freezes, that the beaver can be frozen out. And by freezing out, I mean where the ice blocks their ability to leave the lodge and access their food cache in the wintertime. That's what we're referring to. That's what a freeze out means. And it will starve the beaver and kill them. That's just not appropriate as professionals, right? We shouldn't be doing that. Can accidents occur? Certainly they can occur. But we need to keep this in mind. So if you're getting it down to, 2 feet and you have 1 foot of freezing water in the wintertime, well, then that's not going to be enough for a beaver to get out of the lodge and get to their food cache, right? So think about how far you're dropping that water level down. My suggestion is you think about something like 3 feet. Again, I have not been able to find any data on what those numbers must be. You kind of have to make a judgment call on your part, but think about what a beaver would need to get out of its lodge and get to the channel, how much icing could be there and it still survive. And then, you're doing averages, and think about the heavier freezes that you've had. Always think about some of those outlier events. You want to make sure the beaver don't get frozen out. Always consider legalities. Beaver are typically a fur bearer in most states. I think there may be one or two that don't treat them as a fur bearer. So when they have a fur bearer designation, typically you have to have some sort of a permit to take them out of season. So make sure you're aware of all that. You also need to think about whether you need any wetlands permissions, because when you're disturbing a beaver dam, you're disturbing a wetland. Again, some states, whenever you're disturbing a beaver dam, you have to have a permit because that automatically is disturbing a wetland. So you may have to look at both your your environmental assessment groups in the state as well as your fish, wildlife, and parks agencies in the state. So make sure you're covered on all of those. And then maybe I'll throw in the third one, and that is, remember, the beaver lodge may be on one person's property and the beaver dam may be on another person's property. So make sure you know where things are in terms of property lines. A lot of times streams are property borders, so you need to be sure you have permission to do access to all these particular areas, and neighbors can get pretty upset if you're disturbing things around near their property as well. So definitely make sure you've got all your legal I's dotted. And so most of you, of course, have experience with dealing with clients and their nosy neighbors. And so make sure you're on your best behavior with that. So make sure everything's on the up and up when you're handling this. When you have your client interview, have a real come to Jesus conversation with them. And that is really, what is the fundamental issue? What is the part of the iceberg that's below the... They'll say there's too many beavers, but is that really the issue? Or is the issue the flooding? I've talked about this before in previous podcasts, like when a farmer says, we got too many deer out in my cornfield. Is the problem the number of deer, or is the problem the deer are eating the corn? So remember, our job is not just simply to see how much we can kill, how much we can have a body count, right? Our job is to solve the real problem. So in the case of the farmer, if you can stop the deer from eating the corn, what does he care how many deer there are? Same way with the client. If the issue is flooding, then solve the flooding problem. If the problem is beaver cutting the trees, then that's obviously a different question. Beaver pipes that are used in dams are used to manage flooding. And if that's what they can be used for. So they're maintaining the colony there while maintaining a lower water level that's still tolerable for the beaver and tolerable for the landowner. Okay? So to go down these considerations again, let's list them. Can some flooding be tolerated? We've talked about spring runoff and heavy rainstorms. Is the dam in a safe place? Because if there was a catastrophic blowout, would it threaten people downstream in a significant way? Can tree cutting be tolerated? Of course. Is there enough water depth for after you put in the pipe for the beaver to survive the winter and so they don't get froze out? Have you covered all the legal bases here? Property access to the dam. Can you manipulate the dam? Are you looking at wetlands violations? Of course, you also have to deal with fur bearer regulations as well. Are there downstream and upstream issues? And what we mean by that is, remember that if you bring the water level down too far, that may stimulate the beaver to build another dam downstream or upstream. So you need to be sure that your client is prepared for the fact that the beaver, realizing that something's happened with his dam and the water level, may build upstream or build downstream or both. So there may be additional dams that have to be done. So that's something to think about. We can't predict what that's going to do. My understanding is if the water levels dropped a lot, what is a lot? We got to divine the number of a baby. But I would say if you drop the water level by a third, that's a lot. Okay, because remember, the top third of a pond has a lot more water than the bottom third. Okay, so if we're dropping the water level a lot, then don't be shocked if the beaver is responding to that. But the beaver may respond to it even as no matter what, because that's what beaver do. They'll build a downstream dam, so that gives them another water area to access other resources the same way upstream. So this is one of the things that you want to have that conversation. This isn't a very pleasant conversation, but sometimes people are like, yeah, I don't care about the dams up there. I don't live up there. The water flooding wouldn't be an issue. It might even be a benefit to them. Okay, so these are the types of questions you need to have these honest conversations and recognize, there may be a need for a second beaver pipe on another dam that's installed later. Okay, keep that in mind, because remember, beaver are dynamic. You need to be dynamic too. So what are some options for your pond levelers? Well, this is the Clemson leveler. This is one of the granddaddies of it. I am not recommending this particular device. However, it does have one advantage to it, and that is it can maintain water at a specific level. And that is, you simply use the pipe. You see the standing pipe there to the left. That will tell you what the level of the pond will be. So you can adjust that up or down depending on what your goals are. The problem with this particular device, it works very well, is it's extraordinarily time-consuming to build. It takes a lot of equipment, and it's heavy. Very heavy. I almost used a word I probably shouldn't use. So it's really heavy. So it's not something as a professional you probably want to use because it's going to cost a fortune for your client. Okay. A better idea is these flexible pond levelers. This is sort of a trademark term used by a company out of Massachusetts that I talked about in my previous presentation. beaversolutions.com. That's beaversolutions.com. Just freedom. I don't make any money off of them. So I just think that they have a lot of experience, and they have a wonderful video. I've done a review of that video for the Fur Takers magazine, and I can't speak highly. It's so simple. I can do it, right? And that's saying a lot, because I'm not a very handy person. But what they're using, of course, is this flexible pipe here, and they create a cage, and they put the pipe in the cage, they weigh it down, and then they put it through the dam at the level they want the water at, and then it drops the water level down. So what's the cage for? Well, the cage is to do a couple things. One is it makes sure that the beaver can't feel the water movement, and protects them from gumming that all up with the cage, right? So the cage protects them from damming around it. And that all should be submerged. You're not always going to get it submerged. I'm going to show you some photos. We used a double-walled pipe, and we didn't kind of cut through that second wall, so our pipe was floating a lot more on the water. So there's advantages and disadvantages with double-walled pipes as opposed to single-walled. You may need to talk about that. So there's a lot more little things that have to be done with the pipe, like cutting a slit along the top so it gets the air bubbles out so it will sink, and different things like that. You have to have some cinder blocks to help weigh it down. Again, ours didn't get weighed down. Ours was just on top of the water. It's not always the prettiest phenomenon there, but a lot of you are going to be certainly handy. You'll figure it out or do some additional reading on this. We're sort of introducing this project. So what are some materials that you need? Well, you need a rake and shovel and pliers and shovel, cordless drill bits, cordless circular saw, heavy gauge wire, about 12 gauge. There's aluminum wire there, waders, gloves, hog panels, and of course your 12-inch pipe. Can you use different size pipes? Sure, you can use different size pipes, but 12-inch is a good standard type pipe. You may need some additional labor with yourself as well, and maybe even a canoe. So here we have an example of a working pipe. So this was cut down. I would encourage you to have as much work done prior to going to the pond as possible. You want to build your cage, get a flatbed, and just carry it all out. Sometimes people will build it on site. I just think there's some advantage. If you have a garage that you're working in, especially if you're doing this in the wintertime or something, this is definitely something that you'd want to have done before you get out in the field. It's just going to be a whole lot more convenient for you. But again, you can build this on site if you wish. So I'm going to certainly recommend beaversolutions.com. That's beaversolutions.com. That's a website. Maybe I should take a few moments here and just have us go out there and just show you what this site is all about. Talked about them last time. And they have a lot of information here that you can definitely use and get advice. I just think highly of this company because of the video that they created. So you can definitely check this out some more, because in Massachusetts in 1996, when they banned a lot of our trapping equipment, this really forced beaver pipes to take more to the fore, because it was a way of managing beaver issues without having to trap them. And so it was kind of compelled into that particular direction. Now, are there situations where you have a beaver that is just damming and it's just becoming a real pain? And so in those situations, there are times when you can, if you have a family, where you can take out one or two of the adults, and that's by putting traps far away from the lodge. Take out the adults, and the younger beaver aren't as aggressive in dam building, and that can often be a way of taking some pressure off of your beaver pipes. So if there's an error, or sometimes you just deal with a beaver that's just not following directions, and those are situations where you can remove those dam buildings, aggressive dam building beavers, and then you can try to get some peace and quiet for a while in terms of dam building. But make sure you're trapping far away from the lodge at that particular point, trying to get the full-on adults. And that can be a way to sort of take some of that pressure off if you're having some issues. But generally speaking, if you do things well, it won't be a problem. However, animals don't always do what we want them to do, and that would be a way. That's why I said trapping sometimes has to play a part of using a beaver pipe system. Well, I hope you found this helpful. I hope you are going to be able to think about at least using this in your particular system and the type of service that you offer your clients. I just want to repeat, it is an underutilized tool, and I hope to encourage more of you to at least explore it, whether it be for protecting culverts or doing pond leveling. I think this is something we need to get behind, and it is a responsible way of helping clients resolve human-wild conflicts.
This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant Podcast. Vertebrate pest control is an inherently dangerous activity involving risk of bodily injury to you, others, and/or property. Vertebrate pest control also involves legal issues, so be sure to always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and/or other control methods when controlling pests. Wildlife Control Consultant LLC, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their affiliates are not responsible for your use of the information provided here. Always consult a qualified and appropriate professional before employing the information provided here.